Am I the a-hole for rejecting the family my father chose over me? I'm 20M, honestly just exhausted. Not physically, but deeply, soul-crushingly exhausted by the ghost of a man who should have been my father. And now, I'm exhausted by the collateral damage. My parents were never a thing. They had me, and that was the extent of their serious involvement. For the first 7 years of my life, my father was less a parent and more a recurring cameo in a poorly written drama. He'd show up, charm my maternal grandparents, take me out for an afternoon, and then vanish back into the ether. It was a pattern of absence punctuated by brief, often disappointing appearances. He was the perpetual in-and-out guy, a footnote in my real life with my incredible mother and grandparents. Then, when I was 7, my world detonated. My mother died. Unexpectedly. It was a swift, brutal punch to the gut of my childhood. In the chaotic, grief-stricken aftermath, the law stepped in. Automatically, my father became my custodial parent. This sounds simple on paper, like the logical progression of things. In reality, it was 20 hours of pure, unadulterated terror and confusion. 20 hours where I was shuttled to the house of a near stranger, a house that smelled unfamiliar, a space that didn't hold my mother's scent or my childhood comforts. I remember the stark silence of that house, a silence so different from the bustling comfort of my grandparents' place. I was 7, freshly orphaned, and suddenly staring down the barrel of a life with a man who didn't even know my favorite color, let alone how to comfort me. 20 hours. That's how long it took for him to decide that being a full-time father to his traumatized, grieving 7-year-old son was too much hassle. He dropped me off at my maternal grandparents' house. It wasn't a tearful goodbye or a promise to come back soon, it was a transaction. A passing off of responsibility. My grandparents, the true heroes of my life, immediately stepped up. They became my everything. But it wasn't easy. They had to sue my father for child support. Think about that. They had to fight tooth and nail in a legal system to get the bare minimum financial assistance from the man whose DNA made up half of mine. And yet, simultaneously, he had the audacity to sue for visitation rights. The cycle didn't break, it just became legally sanctioned. He was in and out, just as much as before, only now it was mandated by a court order. And even then, he barely complied with the financial obligations. He was supposed to be paying, but sometimes the payments would dry up for months. I would go more than a year without seeing him. The visits were sporadic, unpredictable. A weekend here, maybe a week in the summer there. And the quality of those visits? It was almost worse than the absence. Sometimes, he'd pick me up, drive me to a location, and then just leave me with someone else. A friend, an acquaintance, whoever. He'd go off and do his own thing, meet friends, go on dates, whatever selfish pursuit was more important than spending time with the child he fought for visitation rights for. I was a prop, a child-shaped obligation he could delegate away. I was being babysat during my father-son time. The message was clear, I was an inconvenience, a burden on his actual life. Around the time I hit 15, things shifted subtly on his end. He got more put together, as people say. He finally held down a steady job, seemed to be taking life slightly more seriously. The calls became a little less sporadic, the promises a little less flimsy, but the fundamental distance remained. He was still largely absent from my life, just a more solvent, slightly more responsible version of his former self. But for me, the damage was already done, the foundation of my relationship with him, or lack thereof, was already concrete. He could have a corner office and a 3-piece suit, it didn't change the 7 years of neglect and the 20-hour abandonment. When I was 17, I learned he had gotten married. Just a piece of information delivered without fanfare. Then, that summer, he decided, unilaterally, that it was time to play Father of the Year. He forced me to spend 2 weeks with him, his new wife, and her children, his stepkids. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order delivered through my grandparents, a clear indication that he was flexing his minimal, court-granted rights to try and create a picture-perfect life that simply didn't exist. I remember the drive there being filled with a nauseating dread. I pulled up to a house that looked like a magazine spread, immaculate, bright, and offensively normal. The moment I walked through the door, I was assaulted by an eagerness I wasn't prepared for. His wife was a whirlwind of practiced warmth and beaming smiles. She was all, "Oh, it's so wonderful to finally meet you. We've heard so much." Her kids, a couple of years younger than me, were just as intense. They were talking like I was their long-lost older brother, immediately excited, immediately claiming a relationship that had zero foundation. "Wait till you see the gaming setup. We can teach you how to skateboard. They were innocent, yes, but their expectation was a suffocating weight. They were clearly hyped up by their mother and, I guess, by my father's lies. His wife was acting like she was already auditioning for the role of the perfect stepmom. She asked me about school, about my hobbies, about my future plans, all while making sure I was comfortable. It was too much, too fast. It felt fake, like a performance staged for her benefit, for their new, blended, family narrative. I spent those 2 weeks as a human brick wall. I perfected the art of avoidance. I stayed in the guest room, only emerging for meals, and even then, I kept my eyes on my plate. If they were in the living room, I was in the yard. If they went outside, I stayed inside. I gave one-word answers, avoided eye contact, and made my discomfort palpable. The kids started getting confused, then visibly upset. Their initial excitement curdled into hurt and bewilderment. They couldn't understand why their cool, new, older brother wanted nothing to do with them. The wife, however, was persistent. One evening, she cornered me while I was trying to sneak a sandwich in the kitchen. "Sweetheart," she began, her tone a careful mix of concern and firmness, "I need to ask you something. You've been here for over a week, and you haven't spent any time with the family. Why are you so unwilling to get to know me and the kids? They're really disappointed." She kept pressing. She even asked, with a surprising amount of bewilderment, why my father and I weren't spending time together. As if I was the one who had been consistently ditching him since childhood. I didn't answer her. I didn't trust my voice not to shake with years of suppressed bitterness. I just looked at the refrigerator door, gripping my sandwich, and waited for her to stop. She was asking my father these questions, too, wondering why his long-lost son wasn't jumping for joy at the chance to have a new family. I think, ultimately, my father realized his attempt at a nuclear family cosplay was an embarrassing failure. He probably couldn't stand the mounting tension and the sad, confused faces of his new wife's children. Or maybe, just maybe, he caught a flicker of the cold, justified rage in my eyes. Whatever the reason, he found it easier to let me go home. The 2-week visit was cut short. I was back at my grandparents' house, the place that was always home, long before the month was up. That was the last time I saw or spoke to my father. It was the only time I ever saw his wife and her children. That was 3 years ago. The silence was instantly better than the forced interaction. Even after that disastrous, abbreviated visit, the attempts at connection didn't cease. They just became externalized, a stream of unwanted communiques directed to my grandparents' address. I started receiving invites for the kids' birthday parties. Invites for Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner. I never opened them. They went straight into the trash. Then came the cards. Birthday cards, Christmas cards, always containing gift cards, a clear attempt to buy some goodwill. I knew they weren't from my father. The handwriting was neat, feminine, and utterly unfamiliar, but instantly recognizable as the wife's from the one card she made me open during that hellish summer. The gift cards went unused, sitting in a pile of rejection on my desk, a physical manifestation of the boundary I was trying to maintain. They were all ignored. I didn't want their money, and I definitely didn't want their family celebrations. I was 20, in college, trying to build a future that had absolutely nothing to do with the man who helped create me. A few weeks ago, my phone rang. Unknown number. Usually, I'd let it go to voicemail, but for some reason, a moment of weakness, a cruel twist of fate, I answered. It was her. The wife. The moment her voice hit my ear, I felt my muscles tense up, years of resentment hardening in my chest. She started off carefully, apologetically, saying she needed to talk. This is what brings us to the core of the dilemma. She told me she only found out the truth after I left that summer. Apparently, my father had fed her a perfectly constructed, idyllic lie. She had been told that he moved around a lot because of his old job and that I wanted to stay in one place with my grandparents. The most insulting part? He claimed he saw me every month without fail and that we had a good relationship. He even told her I was excited to be a big brother and to have another mom figure in my life. I listened to this litany of deceit, and the years of pain twisted into a tight, burning knot in my stomach. He hadn't just neglected me, he had actively gaslit his new family to maintain a facade. Then came the emotional payload. She mentioned something about being pregnant. I can't recall if she meant they were trying, she was currently pregnant, or had recently given birth. It was a blur, honestly, but the implication was clear. There was potentially a biological half-sibling in the picture. She quickly pivoted back to her main point. She wanted me to know her kids, her stepkids, and to have a relationship with them. She framed it as a beautiful, low-pressure way to have more family, and for her kids to finally have the older brother they had been hyped up to have. She was relentless, throwing out ideas. We could meet for lunch somewhere public, I'd happily pay for food of your choice. It doesn't have to be a responsibility for you, just a connection. She was really trying to win me over, laying her earnestness bare. The thing is, I believe her sincerity. I believe she was lied to, and I believe she sees her children's hurt and wants to fix it with the easiest, most available solution, me. But listening to her try to package this family as some kind of heartwarming opportunity snapped something inside me. All the years of my father's intermittent presence, the 20 hours of abandonment, the court battles, the neglect, the gaslighting, it all coalesced into a single, cold certainty. I cut her off. My voice was steady, calm, and utterly devoid of emotion. I knew this was a high-stakes moment, and I needed to be clear. Look, I said, the word heavy and final. I appreciate you telling me your side of the story, and I am genuinely sorry that he lied to you. But I need you to understand something, and I need you to understand it clearly so we never have to have this conversation again. I paused, letting the silence drive the point home. I am not interested. I am never going to be interested in a relationship with you or your children. Regardless of whether you have a child with him or not. That is not my family. I do not consider him my family, and I have absolutely nothing to do with that side of things. It holds zero interest for me. It never will. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the professional finality of a business refusal. I wasn't confessing to a priest, I was setting a permanent boundary with a stranger who was trying to break into my life. She recoiled, audibly, on the other end. Please, you need to reconsider. Think about the kids. She was immediately ready to fight for this, to use guilt and pity as weapons. That was my cue. I'm hanging up now, I said, and before she could get another word out, I ended the call. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. A week later, a thick, formal-looking envelope arrived at my grandparents' house, addressed to me. I knew instantly who it was from. It was a letter, penned in that same neat handwriting. It was 5 pages long, front and back, single-spaced. I skimmed the first page and a half, enough to get the gist, which was essentially a detailed, 5-page guilt trip. She basically told me to consider the kids, detailing how much it hurts to be rejected and how I could stop this from happening. Stop what from happening? The continued existence of a family unit I want no part of? The pain of rejection? She was effectively telling me that their emotional well-being was my responsibility to fix, simply by showing up. The audacity was breathtaking. I didn't finish reading it. I tore it up, not out of anger, but out of a need to physically destroy the attempt at emotional manipulation. Now, I'm left with the aftermath. My grandparents support me completely, telling me I have the right to choose who is in my life. But the wife's words, the consider the kids, the pain of rejection, are echoing in my mind. They're just kids. They are innocent in all of this. My father is the true villain, the architect of all this misery and deceit. But by rejecting her and her children so absolutely, so coldly, am I becoming a secondary, lesser villain? Am I the a-hole for refusing to be the emotional crutch for his new life, even though the cost of that refusal is their confusion and hurt? I keep telling myself I owe them nothing, but the thought of their disappointed faces from that summer keeps creeping back in. Am I the a-hole for telling my absent father's wife I'm never going to be interested in a relationship with her or her children regardless of whether she has some with my father or not? I need to know if my boundary is too high, or if it's the only logical response to a lifetime of abandonment. Update. Honestly, after I hung up on her and tore up her letter, I thought the story ended there. I thought I could just push it into the corner of my mind where I store all things connected to my father and forget about it again. But this whole situation didn't go quietly. It didn't fade. It didn't let me stay numb. It unraveled. Her letter didn't just disappear when I tore it up. Because she didn't stop. A few days later, my grandfather got a phone call from her. She somehow thought calling the home of the people who raised me was a good idea. He didn't tell me right away. I only learned about it because I overheard him telling my grandmother that the woman's voice was shaking and that she sounded scared more than anything. Apparently, all she asked was whether I received her letter. My grandfather, who has never raised his voice the entire time I've known him, told her in the coldest tone that I did, that I am an adult, and that she is never to contact me again. He said he wouldn't allow her to worm her way into the life of the child she and her husband both abandoned emotionally. He hung up before she could respond. When he told me this, I felt something I wasn't prepared for. Guilt. Not guilt for rejecting her, or her kids. Not guilt for drawing a boundary. But guilt for dragging my grandparents, my real parents, back into the orbit of a man who hurt them too. A man who turned their entire 50s and 60s into a crash course in emergency parenting. They never once made me feel like a burden. But for the first time, I felt like I brought that world back into our home. My grandmother noticed I wasn't eating much. I was getting headaches. My sleep was wrecked. Every time my phone lit up, my stomach clenched like someone shoved a fist inside me. The call from her, the letter, the renewed attention, it all cracked something. One night, about a week later, I walked into the kitchen at midnight to get a glass of water and found my grandmother sitting alone at the table, holding one of my childhood photo albums. She wasn't crying, but she looked tired. Tired in a way I hadn't seen since I was a kid. When she noticed me, she smiled and patted the chair next to her. I sat, silent, because I didn't want to invite a conversation I wasn't ready for. But she opened the album anyway. It was the section right after my mother died. There were photos of me asleep on her lap because the nightmares were so bad she didn't dare move. Photos of my grandfather teaching me to ride a bike just to distract me from asking why my father didn't call that week. Photos of the tiny bed they set up for me in their room because I kept waking up screaming for my mother. I couldn't look at the pictures for long. I felt like I was staring straight into the eyes of a child abandoned twice, first by fate, then by blood. My grandmother eventually said, very softly, "Sweetheart, you are allowed to love yourself more than the children of the man who didn't love you." And something inside me broke open. I didn't sob. I didn't wail. I didn't fall apart. I just leaked. Slow, silent tears, like a faucet someone forgot to turn off. I think that moment was the first time in years I let myself feel like a child again. Not the hardened, boundary-setting adult telling strangers no, but the hurt little boy who got dropped off at a house that wasn't his home by a man who didn't want him. She came to my grandparents' house. She didn't barge in screaming or anything like that. She stayed on the public sidewalk. But she stood there for almost 15 minutes, holding a piece of paper, clearly debating whether to knock. My grandfather opened the door before she gathered the courage. I don't know what he said. He made sure I stayed inside. But I saw her through the window. Even from a distance, she looked like someone who wasn't sleeping. Someone who'd been crying. Someone unraveling in her own way. She didn't yell or plead. She didn't try to force her way in. She just handed my grandfather the paper, another letter, and left. He tore it in half without reading it and dropped it into the kitchen trash. He told me, gently but firmly, "We are not entertaining this." And that should have been the end. But when someone shows up physically at your home, when they insert themselves into your actual reality, it changes something in you. I felt exposed. Violated. Like my safe place had a crack in the walls now. I said I didn't read the second letter. And I didn't. But my grandmother did. Not because she wanted drama, or because she didn't respect my boundary. She read it because she was worried this woman was unstable enough to escalate, and she wanted to know what we were dealing with. She didn't show me the letter, but she told me the contents in a calm, quiet voice that made everything worse. The wife wrote about how the kids cry asking why I don't want them. She feels powerless because she didn't know the truth. She's pregnant. She doesn't want her baby to grow up in the cycle of abandonment. She believes God put me in their life for a reason. She wants the new baby to know their big brother. She's afraid her marriage is falling apart. She doesn't know how to reconcile my father's lies with her reality. But the worst part, the part that made me feel like I swallowed stones, was this. I know you were abandoned. I know you were hurt. But please don't punish my children for the sins of a man who also hurt me. My grandmother folded the letter into tiny squares and burned it in the sink. She didn't let me touch it. Didn't let me dissect it. Didn't let me latch onto any piece of guilt-inducing manipulation. But she couldn't shield me from the weight of those words. About a week after the driveway incident, my phone rang again. This time it was my father. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that still makes my hands shake thinking about it. He wasn't angry. He wasn't yelling. He sounded exhausted, older than he had any right to sound. He said, "I know you don't want anything to do with me. I've earned that. But she's breaking. She thinks this is her fault. The kids are confused. I don't know what to do." He let out the sound, half sigh, half sob, that made my stomach twist. "You're allowed to hate me, but please don't hate them." And that was it. No apology. No ownership. No recognition of his role in the chaos. Just a plea thrown into the void, asking me to fix something I didn't break. I deleted the voicemail. But I can't delete the way it made me feel. Since then, the wife hasn't contacted me again. My father hasn't either. My grandparents have become fiercely protective, checking the mail before I do. I started therapy again. And I don't mean I should start therapy. I mean I sat in a room with a woman who asked me to describe the feeling I get when I hear the words Big Brother, and I cried harder than I have in years.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Daily Tales Update for more such stories.